Hi everyone, thanks so much for tuning in tonight to hear Arieh Frosh and Cynthia Carllini talking about their latest projects. We are Conscious Isolation and we're live from University of East London. Arieh and Cynthia, thank you so much for talking to us tonight. I'm really excited to hear what you have to say, and yeah, over to you whenever you're ready. Thanks so much.
Hi Susie, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thanks Susie and Conscious Isolation for having us. Yeah, I'm Arieh, and this is Cynthia. We're both artists with like our own independent practices, but often like work on projects that are kind of either wholly collaborative or create projects with like an umbrella that people can kind of contribute to or collaborate within. And we wanted to use this talk to kind of discuss this kind of collaborative approach, especially when operating within the pandemic, and like particularly thinking about a recent project that we were both involved in. And we kind of want to look at that project through kind of the framing of a collaborative practice, but also kind of use the project to question things about like kind of collaboration. Yes, sorry, the project I'm referring to is Cynthia's project, really. So she's going to tell us more about it in a moment. So it's an exhibition in Buenos Aires at the Water Museum called Day Zero, and I'm one of 5 artists who've been invited to contribute videos into the exhibition. I think what we'll do is Cynthia's going to talk about the exhibition and her thinking around it, and then I'll introduce my work and like particularly what I contributed to that project, and then I guess we'll speak to each other about some of the things that arise in those presentations. Cynthia, do you want to?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hi guys. Hi everyone. Okay, I will share my screen and I will show you the museum first, and then I'll talk a bit about my practice. Share. Okay, this is the Palace of Running Waters. At the end of 2020, I presented a project to be commissioned at the Museum of Running Waters in Buenos Aires, Argentina. The building of the museum is considered a national patrimony because of its architecture and its history. It was the first pumping station in the country that now works as offices for AISA, which is the National Water Service Company. Every single piece of it came by ship from England, Belgium, and France. The whole building, like on the outside, all the pieces are all numbered and put together in Buenos Aires. It was built like a puzzle, like over 100 years ago. Despite the pandemic, the proposal was approved for this year, and the show was supposed to open on International Water Day on the 22nd of March, but well, after the setup, it got postponed indefinitely. So, well, this is the outside of the museum, and this is the museum indoors, which is crazy. The architecture is crazy, and you don't expect, when you see the palace on the outside, you don't expect it to be this industrial looking on the inside, but it is an amazing space. So, well, now it's closed down. I'll tell you a bit about my practice, and then we can go back to the show. I researched the use of collage as a working method operating with and through the absurd. At the moment, and for a few years, I have been researching the hysteresis phenomenon in practical beliefs, within ideas of migration, non-borders, resistance, hope, pause, and reorganization. Hysteresis is a non-linear movement, a magnetic inertia, a mismatch, a lag in response to changing forces. In sound, a distortion. In practical beliefs, when a belief of the past is triggered in the present and fails, as the circumstances of the environment are no longer ideal for a specific belief to be put in practice, the hysteresis phenomenon occurs. My research often takes shape in practice through collaborative projects. When dealing with a specific matter, I invite other artists whose practices somehow reflect on this to take part by producing a specific work for the proposal. In these projects, my role could almost be described like a theater director that proposes a set and invites others to improvise the proposed theme within the proposed theme and the narrative of their very own practice. In the process of inviting other artists to inhabit, transit, and intervene my work, I have learned new ways to understand my practice as a whole. This way of working became an axis to articulate practice and research. When life is experienced as fractured, no longer supported by a steady stream of habitual associations, different forces collide to make sense out of the nonsense. Collage often occurs in times of crisis, when due to an irreconciliation with the present time, arises an urgency to propose new narratives as to disassemble existing ones. So in the collaborations, each artist's work is considered as an agency, as a ready-made concept, as a cutout, in the sense that it's something that exists on its own within someone's specific practice. I propose in these setups different ways that these agencies can dialogue, perceive, and inhabit one another, to try out the potentiality to act that a ready-made concept acquires when put in a specific context. When a matter is seen through the paradigm of interactions, the dialogue between these cutouts frees from cause and effect, and it allows for understandings regardless and beyond the issue of its own history. So the collaboration projects in this sense can be seen as a collage moment. Okay, this is like a panoramic view of the installation from across it. Here I have invited 7 artists to be part of the installation with a moving image piece. I have asked them to produce a specific work for the show, and we kind of took as I was writing the proposal at the end of 2020, I found out that water began to be traded water in California began being traded at the future stock market in Wall Street. So the show kind of goes around that issue. So I will let Arieh speak a bit about his practice, and then I'll show you each artist's work. Is that okay with you, Arieh?
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry, I was just the screen was sharing still. So confused. That was great to hear. Thank you, Cynthia. I will share my screen in a second. I just to introduce myself a bit. I'm a London-based artist. We met, Cynthia and I, at the Royal College of Art, which then obviously like our studies kind of were within the pandemic, and then we amongst many people having to respond to that. But I tend to work with an interdisciplinary approach, kind of bringing together 3D computer animation, like motorized sculptures, writing and film to form narrative-based projects. Like in a broad sense, my recent research interests around how technology, language, interspecies thinking can produce fictions that might like question contemporary local conditions and their historic underpinnings, and could maybe form generative alternatives. I think I will quickly talk through a number of works before focusing kind of on what I produced for the exhibition in Buenos Aires. Sorry, 1 second, just trying to share the screen. Is that working okay? Cynthia?
Yeah, it's great.
Okay, great, thank you. Amazing. So just to talk a little bit about my previous work. This is a project combining animation, motorized sculptures, text, and audio. It began with a 16th century illustration by the naturalist Ulysses Aldrovandi, and it's uses as character of a harpy. Harpies tend to be bird-woman hybrids, although they often incorporate parts of other creatures, and are always written about in this kind of derided position by histories of male writers, mostly male writers, but writers generally. So here I was trying to voice harpies kind of in opposition to this way of thinking about them, and instead taking them as a kind of a reference to hybridity, able to talk across species and genre, and ultimately embodying what I saw as a kind of like long-standing, sort of like from their origins to now, to contemporary, kind of radical interconnectedness, particularly between species. So this is one form of the project. It's becoming a infinite animation sequence. This is just it on a loop, of course, but it's soon to have a audio that's going to be like generative, so that the audio will never repeat, and the harpy will play forever. Another part of this project is a series of kind of like motorized sculptures that are in discussion with each other. To talk like about right now, this project with Cypher Billboard, who are an arts organisation based in London, working with this billboard site in Bounds Green. This was a collaborative project. I think it's one of the first projects I talk about that sort of involve collaboration in my work. And it was with another artist, Ed Compson, but also with Year 4 students at Bounds Green School. And it was focused on how we can capture and represent the wind. And we wanted to think about like how, like with the UK moving more to kind of like wind energy and creating this kind of rhetoric around it that's often taken by different like groups or companies and politicians as their own. We wanted to sort of like think about how a move to wind energy might influence how people's imaginations could change in the future, sort of in a similar way to how the Industrial Revolution affected people's imaginations. That's something the book Pandemonium by Humphrey Jennings kind of really brings out. So for this, we invited students to kind of like, we introduced them to ideas of wind energy and also representations of wind in art, and asked them to kind of design their own wind turbines, which I then 3D visualized, and we printed that on the billboard. So you'll see some of like, yeah, this is a collage one of the students made, and then there's a 3D visualization. It's got bees and a heart. And again, this one's great. It says, the pole needs to be tall and slippery because it's not a climbing frame. We were also collecting wind data using an anemometer on top of the billboard, and then turn that into a radio show. It was, yeah, it was quite an interesting approach as collaborators for this, because I guess it's with children, and there's also this variable element like that is the wind that's like producing this data for us. So there's this kind of exercise in control. It's like creating openings for the children to respond to, and work freely within, and then trying to sort of formulate it so it makes sense as like a kind of public project. Simultaneously to this, I've been involved in Spur World, which is along with 13 other artists, and it's focused on developing ways to work collaboratively kind of in a digital space. It was started within the pandemic by Jerry Holder and well, quite a lot of other artists and organizations. We during the whole project, the whole residency and subsequent exhibition, we were undertaking it as pseudo personas, so basically avatars, and the final exhibition, which is online now and is in Unity, it's kind of an exploration. It's split into these 14 different worlds of avatars, of their kind of subconscious. Mine was a series of bags of bones that you could click on, and they bring up different writing and films, particularly with an archaeologist who has this amazing collection of animal skeletons. The character was supposed to be kind of a distributed network. So the character is formed from this, like from all of these bags of bones. It's not just kind of one of them. It aimed to kind of question biological classification systems. So like if they're a form of containment of species, kind of the question like, well, what if bags of bones were a species? This is a still from that meeting with the archaeologist. I wanted to talk about some water collaborations, because the show Cynthia's project is very much based around water, and a few years ago I was also kind of working in various ways around water and collaboration, so it was kind of really nice to be involved in Cynthia's project for that way. This project was invited lots of different writers in Glasgow to choose a body of water space somewhere in the city, and it was like totally up to them, and they would go there and write a response to that space, and then we kind of come together for a writing group, and then we remapped the locations people chose, like using the correct distances, starting from Chisenhale Studios in London, and then working across the canals, the London canals, and then sent a subsequent group of writers to those coordinates to then respond to those spaces. So it was playing with this idea of like contingent narration, where the chance of like a location that you might be sent to totally influences like the produced work. They were kind of presented as a whole and as reading groups too. A similar project was based on a fictional closing of a leisure centre, and an opening of a leisure centre simultaneously formed entirely from language. So it invited writers and artists to create that leisure centre through language, while also kind of criticizing the idea of of how far that can go, really, and like language's kind of architectural potential. And just the final project on that was an exhibition at the Centre for Contemporary Art in Glasgow that was a two-person show, and it focused on bodies of water spaces. My work was looking at spiritual cleansing pools, particularly mikvahs in Judaism, and the idea of there being a spiritual cleansing pool created in Glasgow that for regulation reasons also had to become a kind of swimming pool as well. I was working part-time for the council at that time, so it's called dealing with these regulations. So those sculptural works are mine, along with prints and some writing. I think I hope that's not gone on too long, but I would talk. This is now talking about the work for Day Zero, the show in Argentina. So it was a film that I contributed. It follows two overlapping themes, one of algal blooms and the other one of the Isaac Bashevis singer story called Hanka. I might read one of the quotes from the story here that I use in the film in Spanish, but this is the English. Okay, it goes, late in the evening, when I went out briefly, a hot wind slapped my face. From the ocean came a roar of passions that seemed to have broken through all barriers. We must procreate and multiply. We must exhaust all the powers of lust. The waves glowed like lava, and I imagined I could see multitudes of living beings, algae, whales, sea monsters, reveling in an orgy, from the surface to the bottom of the sea. Immortality was the law here. The whole planet raged with animation. At times, I heard my name in the clamour, the spirit of the abyss calling me to join them in their nocturnal dance. So the footage was primarily shot in Paphos in Cyprus. I was doing a residency at Cyprus College of Art there, and I came across a large swimming pool that was housing the remnants of an algal bloom. Algal blooms, they're increasing in intensity because of the climate crisis, and they tend to occur when there's an excess of a pollutant. So it's here likely produced because the pool lay kind of unclean during COVID-19. It was surrounded by all these villas that were obviously for tourists, and it'd been a good, I guess, 7 months or so since there were any. These are just some stills from the film of that. My discovery of the algae came a bit late. So it's rusted carpeting of the pool implies that it's either been killed by a herbicide or is often the case in algal blooms. It absorbed nutrients at such a rate that it had exhausted them entirely, which is kind of like an expansion into oblivion. Yeah, I'll just show you a couple more. It was really amazing to come across, actually. Yeah, just thinking about, just going back to the quote, Isaac Bashevis' story, Hanka, focuses on a Yiddish writer who travels to Buenos Aires, where the show was obviously taking place. And he describes this orgy-like fantasy of the sea, from microscopic algae, but all the way to whales, and where procreation and multiplying are like the overriding desires, and that seemed like an algal bloom basically to me. And when the writer arrives in Buenos Aires, he encounters an unknown cousin called Hanka, who recounts stories and characters from the past, and seems to have this quite indirect influence on the failures of the writer's trip. And in time, her very being is called into question, and her behavior is kind of near the supernatural. And reflecting on this, the writer says, all my experiences have been ambiguous. None of them could serve for evidence. Just the same, my belief in spirits becomes ever stronger. And the second half of the film kind of tries to stay with that ambiguity. It's mostly shot at night, and follows just various kind of remnants of systems of water actually in Cyprus, like a banana plantation. A lot of the kind of ways that water works into those systems, and it includes these 3D modeled kind of single algae, which I'll try and show. So we're trying to do that simultaneously. I think this should work. So I was trying to aim for the point that kind of microscopic observation tends to an exactitude. Like it's often like aimed at classifying and understanding at a subcellular level. But the images produced, often when they're circling in like social media and like extracted from research, they can be like quite translucent and otherworldly, and it makes them quite like ambiguous and open. I think I will stop sharing and we can talk. Yeah, we can talk a bit more. Sorry, I'm not sure how long that went on.
That was great. Thank you, Arieh.
No worries. Oh, and the cat is in here. Good strength. But yeah, sorry, I feel like I've spoken for a while, so I might ask you a question, if that's okay.
No, that's okay. Since you just finished with your work, I will show a few images of how your work dialogued with the installation and with day zero.
Okay.
And where the conversation takes us. And then I'll show a bit about the other artists. Share.
Brilliant.
Okay, let's go. Okay, with Arieh's video on the bacteria, after the whole setup, the show was lacking. Like I was feeling like trashing the place a bit because it was feeling all very neat and clean. So I developed these bacteria with balloons and flour, which well, as the show finished, as the setup finished, the show closed down. So we kind of have a very small private view on a Thursday, and on Friday they announced that all museums were closing down until further notice. So I still had access to the museum for a few weeks, and I began taking these bacteria every time I would go. So there's like 600 of them in the space at the moment. Like I bought them in big amounts, and I would just make them every day. And every time I would go, I would just take a bag of 50 or 180. So the installation is mutating, and I hope to have all the museum covered with bacteria in a few months when it opens. And yeah, that's just one of the just like one of the things that this collaboration produced, like physically as an end result. So this is I will show you all the artists that took part. This is Alice Bucknell. She did a video called Earth Seed. It is about water capitalism, and Earth ended up underwater because we didn't manage things properly. And she tells a story while this bird is flying over Earth, and it looks really amazing. This is Santiago Ortiz. This is an Argentinian artist. He has been working with the pipe systems of the city for many years, and he did a video called Costa for the show, which is which is a series of photographs and very short moving images about the River Plate, El Río de la Plata, which is where our pipe system ends. This is Lia Porré. She's from France. She did a video about a lake in France that has two waters and one water composition at the top of the lake, and then there's another water composition at the bottom, and they don't mix each other. And the one at the bottom has the same composition than the ice at the Antarctic, and it has like microorganisms from millions of years ago. So she did a story about this lake with this program for video games. This is mine, which is a part actually of another body of work, which is a digital theater play based on Waiting for Godot. And so I thought it was cool to participate with a work that was not directly linked to the show. So this is two avatars swimming in the water, talking to each other about being in a platform served in a tray and being surrounded and not finding a way to escape, and then just deciding to not go anywhere and just wait for nothing. So this is Jamie Steedman. He's from Scotland. His video is about a guy that brings a monkey puzzle tree from a small island in Scotland all the way to Buenos Aires. So the video is the journey of that tree. And the tree was displayed in the space as well. So I got a monkey tree very similar to the one he has in the picture, and then it's next to the video in the space because the journey was successful. And this is Dana Ferrari. She did a video more about the sculptural qualities of water and just water in very different states. And this is Arieh. Okay, he told you already about his video.
I'm back. Yeah, yeah, thanks for going through those. It's quite interesting because you spoke a bit about the origins of the building at the beginning, and then the responses people kind of came back with. They're sort of engaged in like various, I guess, like quite well with different geographies, but like often quite like politically engaged as well. I think like the construction of the building is obviously the way it's constructed, when you're talking about all the materials coming over from like Britain and France, it's got this like kind of, well, I guess it's a kind of imperialist history to it, and then yeah, I what I like about what you've done in the show, I think you like opened it up to people to respond in a way that sort of like dealt maybe not as specifically with the politics there, but like with I guess like water-based politics in various ways. I was thinking about when you spoke about like Alice's water socialism, and also like Jamie, the way his this like monkey tree moving from Argentina to Scotland has this like well, I guess like it's quite an ironic take on like the diplomatic act, making it really like a over romanticized thing. And well, I guess I wanted to ask you a bit about like your openness to that, and like the way how you like maybe dealt with the institution. I guess just about the process, because there were some like things that came back as well, to do with the content. Like the algae, for instance, if it's okay to talk about.
Yes.
Like had some problems in Argentina with algae in that way, and because it's a water company. But obviously I wasn't aware of that. So sometimes these like interesting things come up where like the content of the video might be dealing with something either quite directly or which like is obviously more discussed, but then there's also an indirect thing that sometimes like might, like without knowledge of a place, might influence it. So there's a few points in there, sorry, but I mean whatever.
Yes,
I guess
a
whatever you
lot.
want to pick up
Like,
from.
regarding the nationality of the artists and what that building, the pump station built like a palace, and the importance of that, like the iconic that iconic building for our history and for colonialism here. Definitely working with artists from different from Europe and also with Alice from the US was intentional, and it had a link with the way the building was built and also the way the collaboration worked, like a puzzle, but without knowing the final result of the collaboration. The puzzle, you already can plan how the final result would be, and not in this case, but it had a lot. It was intentional to work with artists from other parts of the world and with Argentinian artists as well. And then, all the other layers that began building up with collaborations. Like we had a massive issue here with the water in the River Plate in December 2020, that cyanobacteria appeared and the whole water turned like a fluorescent green. And then your video was was about bacteria, and here it was impossible to take it out of that context. Because it was middle of summer, everyone was going to the river for a swim, and they couldn't get in because of that cyanobacteria that was multiplying itself. So I thought it was also something cool to develop and to take it a bit further out to the physical space beyond your video. And it also brought a few issues with the museum director at the beginning.
Okay.
Also because it is a public space, and the proposal was sought for a public space. So like aesthetically and also the fact that it's a collaboration and that adds more layers to the work, I thought it would be better to do a collaboration in that space. But your video in this context, when I presented everybody's video to the director, it was an issue because they sell water and they have nothing to do with the National Arts Fund. So they are not an art framed institution. I mean, it is a public space and it is from the government, and they sell water. They charge people for the water service.
But
it was an issue.
Can I pick up? One thing that's great, I think you just showed it before, was like your building from that into the physical space, which isn't something that like we'd maybe like planned priorly, but it's something I think that's like maybe inherent, and you were talking about before, like inherent in collage, that you have to like adjust. I don't know, maybe not in an improvised way, but like at least be open to like it being pulled in different ways by artists. And I think that's like quite an exciting approach for you generally. but also just on the last thing you said, which sorry, this has gone out of my mind. You talk.
Having issues with the cyanobacteria.
Oh no, sorry, about selling water. Part of it was to do when you also mentioned the stocks, the way that water is influenced by like the market, and what the price of it is or can be invested in. I think like there's quite a lot of like well, just like complexity to those ideas, but then the way that I think like you managed to channel it, as you mentioned, like it's a public space, so there's this and like open to people walking in, right, and like just to a lot of like school tours and things like that. Well, it would be if it wasn't shut. And so I was just wondering about the way that you've like managed to sort of communicate all that stuff, which I think you've done really well.
Well, I had to change. I had a lot of back and forth with the texts, and I managed to include all the. I believe I managed to include all the main points in the text of the show at the space. I will share with you the link to the digital proposal, which is at the museum, and the text is there. But I was lucky in the sense that they are against. They wrote a manifest on the water company from Argentina wrote a manifest about being against the water beginning to be traded in California. They did it through someone else. So it's still a dialogue, I mean, between the institution and the artist, you know, and sometimes when you align with their interests, it's easier, and when you don't, it's about like finding a way or a mask to get away with it. Like regarding the videos, the main reason why I decided to put them in the format of hexagons, to project them type of hexagons, was because they represent water particles when they are frozen or when they are in glaciers. They become hexagons, and so it was easier to just say, okay, the water. sorry about
that. No, it's a great addition.
The water is represented there already, and then it kind of gave a bit more freedom for the actual content, for the real content of the video, by being framed already in a water particle, let's say.
Yeah.
In a way.
Yeah. No, I thought. I know. What's the films? So it's closed. Everything's closed right now for the next few months at least. So yes. there's this interesting thing that like, oh, everything is set up there.
Yes.
And I know like conscious isolation was like responding obviously like to the lockdown as well. Like that's why some of these things are happening. And I think it was part of it for you, wasn't it, to that this project, the collaborative element of this project was partly because of things being so locked down, and you find and I kind of want to reach out to people to work with. Is that?
Yeah, definitely. I think it made it. Yes, I think that was one of the main reasons. Yeah, and it felt wrong to. When I was preparing the proposal in the first place, I wanted something else, and it just felt wrong to do something on my own in a public space. And in December, we actually thought things were going to get better sooner, and well, at least they thought that that's why mission moved on. And then it closed down. So, well, now we just have to wait. It will open eventually.
But I mean, it's obviously quite a specific situation, but it's definitely like interesting for me in the fact that the work that I made for it totally comes from like closure. I was in, the whole reason I was in Cyprus was to do with there was a lot. Well, the reason I was there for long enough to sort of film was because lockdown had started in the UK again, and I ended up staying there much longer than I'd anticipated, basically. And the reason that there was this algal bloom in the swimming pool was because of the closure of those spaces. So like there's sort of like, I think like closures keeps happening in this project, and yeah, I don't know. There's something quite. I think it's something quite interesting, and like has definitely been good to kind of spread amongst people as well, in a way, like to be kind of working on something at the same time and then having to adjust at the same time. I mean, obviously you were having to respond to it more than any of us because we were kind of sending you work. But
yeah, all the works were produced specifically for the show, so everyone produced the moving image in isolation.
Yeah,
you for example, Alice's work is always super busy, and like it's like a scream, you know, and like this one was a very different response to what I would have expected from her. Really? And it happened, I think, with all the works. They all make some kind of reflection on that. I mean, my moving image is it's based on Waiting for Godot, and I started a digital theater play in the pandemia. Also because I was in isolation, and it felt good to participate with that project on another on the installation on another project.
Yeah.
You can see that the isolation in all the videos.
Oh, that's interesting.
Even speak directly. I mean, they don't comment directly on that, but it is another. It became another layer of it.
That's quite interesting. I think like as your position, and I think like I've been in that position in other projects before, but where like you can sort of get a sense of like the things that have come in from contributors or like people you're collaborating with, and start to sort of like see thematically like how people are like kind of linked in this moment, or like which is like obviously there's different approaches, but I think I've not yet had the chance to watch everyone's film, but so you kind of have this like bird's eye view of things, and it's quite I've worked in this way before, and I think like there's a difference between like a sort of collaboration where you're bringing in like everyone on the same kind of level in a way, and then something where it's like your project, but then people are like adding it and taking it apart, and well, those are just thoughts. I mean, it's up to you if you want to add anything.
It does feel different. I've done different kinds of collaboration in which I started the projects from scratch with people that I already had, with other artists that I already shared common interests or that we met in different ways. And in this case, it's more like it might not seem like a collaboration at first when it starts, the project starts, but then as inviting other artists to part of it, immediately the final result is a collaboration, because the work acquires a lot of other layers of readings that it wouldn't have, they wouldn't exist without everybody's work in it, and it becomes something else. Even maybe I proposed the setup first, or or I send you some kind of approach as a proposal. I change a lot in the process of it, along with everybody's practice. So that's actually a very, it is a very enriching way to work. I think he might want to ask some questions.
Yeah, shall I jump in and ask a few questions? We've had a couple in the chat, and then I've got a few as well. Thank you so much for your talk. It's been it's super interesting to see the both, you know, Arieh's practice and the exhibition, and all the variety of works really you've shown. Cynthia, could you talk a little bit about the art scene in Argentina, and maybe how it differs, if it does, from the one in London, from your experience?
Yes. Well, from my experience, I studied, I did my BA in South Africa, in Cape Town. Then I came back to Argentina and I spent 5 years as an artist here before I went to London. Now I've been back for 2 years. The main difference in the scene, I believe, it's the market and money. We don't have much of an art market, and that, yeah, it's a very complex subject, but I think that's the main difference between London and here. Then artists are artists and operations, and just I believe artists share very similar qualities all over the world, but the lack of market here makes a difference for the final results of the works. Like a lot of it becomes very classist, and a lot of artists that can go abroad, and there's little money for commissions. There's just less money, and everything that implies, you know, basically. There's less money to produce. So yeah, that just makes a big difference sometimes I felt from my personal experience when I arrived to London that there is more competition between artists. I'm not saying talking about competition in a negative way, but feels like I felt more pushed for the final result of my work to be in a certain way. And I'm not talking about materials or anything like that, expensive materials. I'm just talking maybe about content and more of a developed final result. And because I got the feeling in a way that I mean, to be like in the center of the world, like in a capital for the arts, like in one of the art capitals of the world. And here everything is more related to our culture, and it makes a lot of reference to that. Whether in London, I don't know, I'm getting into a very a very complex subject, but I feel that's the main difference. We don't have an art market here in Argentina. It's very small, very, very small comparing to London.
Oh, thanks so much. Arieh, could you talk a little bit about the processes behind your CGI works? Like, where do you start? How do you start with that kind of work?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I didn't talk about method much. They are mostly done on Autodesk Maya, that program, and then with the Adobe Suite afterwards. It was something I started learning in the RCA, just because they have this like student access to things, and there's kind of people you can ask about. The reason I started learning was because, well, often in my work I kind of use like characters as a way in to sort of talk about different things. So like the harpy is one of those, and I felt like, oh, I could have this recurring character in a film that's like CGI'd. And I began, it was a tortoise, and I began to work on it, and it ended up taking like, it's still kind of not done. Like the process of CGI was so much like well, I mean, I knew it would be large, but like just every time I sort of was getting somewhere, like it opened up something else that was tricky. But in doing that, I've started to get like yeah, I think more and more interested in the process, and it's opened up kind of different meanings. So the fact, like the way simulations work on Autodesk Maya, where you can like change like the gravity of things. So something like the cyanobacteria falling, they're using they're actually using an N-class function. So they're like taking on the properties of like water balloons, basically, or like water sort of I think they're kind of half water balloon and like a little bit of like beach ball. So you can like plug in different properties of materials, and they're reacting to a certain amount of gravity and then falling, and it's just like a process of like testing over and over to get the falls right and getting it in the right shots. So they're like some of those are falling from like a massive height. So the ones that come later have actually been falling for like a really long time, rather than, I mean, what you could do is set it up so it's like starts at a certain time, but instead I set it so things fall from a different height. So the ones that are falling at the end have fallen like well, like hundreds of meters, because they actually do have these sort of measurements within Maya. But yeah, it's definitely a process I've learned as I've gone making works. And similarly, like the Cypher Billboard project, reacting to drawings by kids, we really didn't know what was going to come in, and that really pushed like my skills. I think I like had to, I was definitely like learning as I was responding to the drawings, like how do you make some of these like shapes that that you're interpreting from a child's drawing. But yeah, I mean, in terms of learning, it was very much through YouTube, and still going on. And I think like it turns out to be like totally bottomless as a process. Yeah, I hope that answered that. Okay.
Yeah, it seems fascinating. I've never never used those kind of programs, so it's, yeah, I just don't even know where to start with them. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's that, like the start is quite hard to know, like even choosing which program to learn, because there's such a big like learning curve.
Yeah.
And like some of the people in the exhibition use like real-time rendering software, so things like Unity, I think, and that is a whole, that's something I feel like, oh, I should learn now. What I'm doing is kind of processing it like frame at a time, like an animation. Yeah.
Do you find you're always playing catch up in a way with those kind of programs and the technology, or?
Like potentially, I'm wondering about. I sometimes think about like, well, I wonder how this is going to look maybe in like. I'm not really. Yeah, I don't think I'm making things so much for like longevity, but I wonder how this technology and this like kind of animation will look in like 20 years time or something. Especially like there was a kind of proliferation of people, of artists using 3D programs, kind of like moving objects around and creating narratives that kind of came from them. And now looking at it, like that was happening maybe like 5 to 10 years ago. I saw a lot of that. It's like, oh, you can kind of place that at a time. So I wonder, yeah, I'm kind of interested how it's going to look a bit later, or like especially as if these programs become easier and easier to use, then if they'll be like, they'll just sort of look commonplace. I think that may be a bit about like Instagram filters, like, oh, there's sometimes like so much more impressive like already than kind of producing something through quite long methods of like of animation.
Well, thank you. Cynthia, could you talk a bit about balancing your curatorial practice with your own art practice? Like, how does one feed into the other? And also, have you always curated, or is it, like, which one came first?
Well, no, my artistic practice came first, and then it's really hard to curate. And for example, in the case of Day Zero, I also participated of the show and proposed the physical installation. So it's really hard to do both in time, because it's very different mindsets. All that dialogue with institution that as an artist, it's way more, you have, and though you have to find a middle ground, it's way more clear where you're standing. And as a curator, it's not, you have to find like, you always need to find a middle ground, always. Like, so it's a struggle with working with a big institution as a curator. Working with this in a smaller place where you can, where you own your decisions, where you can make more free decisions, it's a bit easier. But I was always a visual artist, and then a year ago I have done a show called Potluck, in which I invited artists, 8 artists, to participate with an eatable work. So it was an installation also of all works that people were invited to eat. And Arieh wrote a very beautiful text for it about guts bacteria.
Always bacteria.
Yes, and about being able to trace where you come from through the bacteria, and or where the bacteria comes from. And the whole show was about it was in response to Brexit that was happening at the time, and all artists were working with embodiment and migration, and we gave it a thought to those issues through food. And it's actually amazing to do both jobs, to be an artist and act a bit as a curator. And being an artist, you also allow, I feel that I like it when we all participate together on the curatorial choices, and it's not very sharp, the cut between the two roles. It's like it's like everyone pitches in, and it ends up being like a collaborative thing, the curatorial aspect of it in the end.
Well, thank you. There's a question in the chat. Arieh, did you pick up the 3D stuff at the RCA? Or before?
No, yeah, it was at the RCA. I just started learning on their computers. And then, I think I started right. It was in the summer between the first and second year. So I just was sitting there kind of on my own learning it. And then started to sort of, reach out to technicians for help when things started up again. But then there was only really like, I guess, like a couple months or like maybe a few months where it was open again, and then it was the pandemic. So then I was have just been kind of learning on my computer since then. So it's like fairly new for me. I think maybe like a year and a half I've been doing it. But it's now formed like quite a significant part of like the way I think for art as well. And when I approach a project, I start to think about like even if the entirety isn't in sort of CGI, at least some component of it will like yeah, start to be in there. I didn't expect it to kind of take over like this, but yeah, it has.
Yeah, it's amazingly recent. It's incredible, like how much you picked up so quickly. Could you talk a little bit more about the Bounds Green project? I was intrigued to know if you like followed up with the students to find out what their response was to the project, and also like their work being on such a big billboard in public space. Did you have any responses from them?
Yeah, well, the art teacher, Danny, took them on a trip to see the billboard. And yeah, she messaged us saying like how nice it was. There's the billboard's right next to the school. And it actually, because schools were shut down for a while, and teaching was online, when the billboard going up, like the image going up, actually correlated with students going back into school. So that was quite a nice kind of moment. But yeah, actually it was interesting. At the beginning, some of the students were like worried about their work being seen on that sort of scale, which I'd like definitely anticipated there being kind of excitement. Like I felt like I would have felt quite excited. But actually I can see why it's quite intimidating. But then the art teacher did mention that some of them who were less confident in art, like we only chose a few designs to change, and like totally by the image, not by the student, and some of them we chosen were people that apparently were less confident, and then so that was quite a big thing, I think, for them. But yeah, just I mean, I was amazed by like kind of the intelligence of the responses in the drawings that we got, and also it was we ended up speaking on the radio on BBC Radio London about it, and like there was an interview with one of the kids that was involved, and his sort of like knowledge of like the like ecological issues was like clearly like went way beyond like the workshops we'd done, and it was amazing like to see how his thinking kind of formed. He made the one with the heart and the bees, how his thinking kind of informed that. But yeah, we're hoping to sort of like expand this project a bit, but we'll see.
And do you think you'll ever make one of the machines as
a we have spoken about that. Definitely a miniature. I would like, yeah, it would be amazing to make like a full scale wind turbine like that, see how it functions. Yeah, that's quite a big, big thing to take on.
It would be amazing to see.
Yeah.
Cynthia, I was wondering if you have any advice for any emerging artist curators. There's a lot of people listening are students, so yeah, any kind of any tips for how to balance both things and build up both those kind of sides to a practice?
Just yes, I guess just the main thing is to try to be as faithful as possible to your own interests and not to follow any trends, and to try to work with people that when you feel that your practice relate to someone else's, just to be giving knowledge, to share everything that you feel that would be cool to share with the other with your fellow artists, and yeah, just to make a lot of friends, to collaborate, to help each other, and to work a lot, and to keep working even when you feel like you're going nowhere. Just keep working on things that really interest you. The moment that you do something that doesn't interest you, you lose it. Like that's my main thing, to keep that's the main struggle, I guess, to try to be faithful all the time to what keeps your interest going in your practice.
Brilliant, thank you. We've got one more question in the chat, and then I've got one more question, and then we'll probably wrap it up quite soon. Arieh, the question in the chat is, you work with algae, bacteria, water, and air. Do you feel like there's one of those things that takes a kind of dominant position in your work, or kind of, yeah, are they all equal?
That's interesting. Yeah, as a link, yeah, between things. I don't think there's a hierarchy, but it's interesting that like certain things like reappear throughout work. I think it kind of builds on what Cynthia is saying. Like sometimes it's like sort of going with interests that I'm not totally being sure. But I think what does seem to be like recurrent in my work is like picking things that seem like an interesting, like maybe like initiating narrative point. And like often those things do have some kind of like, I don't know if like scientific is totally the correct term, but like some sort of either biological or like chemical significance. So I think maybe it's because it opens up like readings that might be like sort of seem technical, but then in that technicality can like have a possibility of like creating like a fiction of it as well. And I think that's like what yeah, I think maybe that's like water does that a bit if you and definitely like the algae just by like the aesthetics of it, and then starting to think about like the like biological ideas behind it. I ended up speaking to a researcher on algae for that film, basically to find out what I was filming and like what I was doing. Yeah, I'm not sure about what takes precedent. I've ended up working with like quite a few. Like I said, I use kind of characters often, and I'm trying to sort of resist maybe them becoming like totally animal. But like often they have kind of taken on kind of animal forms, and I think that's, or like part animal forms. I think it's like partly to do with trying to think like a bit across species and to just sort of change a thinking away from a human-centered thinking, which I think is like particularly important right now. But yeah, well, it's partly to that, but also partly to have something that maybe like can like mutate or like talk about a situation in a way that maybe like I wouldn't be like the central narrator, like dictating events. Instead, they're coming through this thing that's like obviously coming from a slightly different like world or perspective, and is therefore like showing us things, but might be in like a slightly corrupted way. And I think like that kind of reading to things is sort of like why I gravitate towards like character or certain sort of scientific concepts maybe as well. I think that was a bit broad of an answer, but
no, yeah, I think it's really interesting. And kind of really connects with your research to for there not to be a hierarchy and kind of decentralized subject matters or kind of interconnected, interwoven subjects as well. So yeah, I think it makes sense. I've just got one more question, which is if you're able to talk about what you've got coming up next, both of you. If you can, you might not be able to mention it, but
Cynthia, do you want to start?
Okay, yes. Well, I'm waiting for day 0 to open again, and there is going to be it's going to be a platform for other collaborations, mainly with Argentinian artists and researchers, and also with researchers, river researchers, our River Plate. There's going to be also a series of talks on the future of architecture from the city of Buenos Aires, and also a collaborative project with an artist from Chile that is living in Uruguay and is having a show at the same time in Montevideo. And we are also going to do something in collaboration here and writing workshops. So that's one project. And then I'm going back to London now in June, and we have a group show with other students from critical practice from the Royal College of Art at Doors, which is a gallery and a residency space in Amsterdam. And then as part of the degree show that is not going to happen this year, we are making a group show at a Camberwell Arts Center at the end of July. So that's also something I'm looking forward to. And yeah, I'm still working on the proposal for that.
That sounds amazing.
Yeah. I hope that the museum opens and that we can start with all the just using Day Zero as a platform to collaborate with our artists, sound interventions, and hopefully in August starts working out like that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm currently, well, as Cynthia mentioned, so we've had this sort of like disrupted end to the RTA. I mean, I'm finished now like last July, but there's some work from there that I was beginning to make, which I kind of mentioned at the beginning, that is like motorized sculptures, and now I'm starting to come back. I think now things are opening up again, and like I'm wanting to sort of like produce that work, and hopefully that will be showing in the space later this year. And I am currently working on this piece of writing for a zine that is well, like about horses. I think it is about animals again, but the zine is like art and fashion and has a lot of horses involved, and so I was quite interested in horses being the receptacle where they sort of develop snake venoms, and starting to think about that and hybridity, and Aldrovandi, who's the naturalist that I used for the harpy, and the way horses appear as like hybrid things in that. So I'm starting to write about those ideas this week. But yeah, I wish I had a concrete sort of date. This is happening then, but yeah, I'm in that idea stage again, I think, after a few projects.
Sounds amazing. Really looking forward to seeing what you both do next. And yeah, thank you so much for speaking to us tonight, and thank you everyone for watching. Yeah, and let's watch this space and keep us posted on what you're doing in the future, because we'd love to follow what you're up to.
Yeah, thanks so much for having us again.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. I'm going to put the
Okay. Bye, Susie. Bye. Thank you.